It's really wonderful to be here with everyone. My name is Derek Smith. I'm the acting director of the Wilmette Institute. And this morning we have the pleasure to welcome you to our webinar entitled That Time Has Now Come by our dear counselor Mwandi Lawson. There's a few announcements that I'd like to offer before we actually get into the webinar. As many of you probably know, the Wilmette Institute is an online educational institution providing university and extension courses dedicated to the building of a new society through transformative education. And our interdisciplinary courses aim to develop the capacity of participants to contribute meaningfully to the current discourses of society, exploring both the spiritual and the material dimensions of our collective advancement. Our educational endeavors inspire commitment to social transformation, drawing upon a Baha'i conceptual framework in the areas of community building, social action, and the contributions to prevalent discourses. There are a few announcements that I wanted to make before we get into the actual webinar. Looking ahead into April, we have 2 extension courses on offer. The first is the Baha'i Faith and the Arts, and the second is Introducing the Tablets of Baha'u'llah for Deepening Devotion and Discourse. And in May, the 2 courses that are offered are Exploring the Quran and Following the Example of Abdul Baha. Then in May, we'll also have another webinar, and that will be a panel discussion about social change through the art of writing. So please don't forget to mark your calendars for that and to register for that webinar on our website. The next online course in Wilmette Institute's Social Transformation Certificate is Approaches to Nonviolent Social Change. And applications are open for this unique and tuition-free program. We're seeking students interested in committing to complete the program and provide meaningful feedback on each course. And this is a graduate level program, so applicants should either have a prior bachelor's degree or be a student in an undergraduate program at the level of junior or senior. And for more information and registration, also please again access our website. And at this point, I think we're ready to get started with today's seminar. And this is live streamed on YouTube, and it will be accessible later on SoundCloud, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And we really hope you enjoy the program, and we invite you to share it with many others. During the presentation, you're invited to post questions in the Q&A section, and those will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So it's really my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce the webinar for today, entitled, again, That Time Has Now Come, with Counselor Mwandi Lawson. Ms. Lawson earned an MBA from the Emory University School of Business, and she is a magna cum laude graduate of Howard University, where she studied journalism and French. Ms. Lawson's broad professional experience includes teaching middle school in an economically challenged California community, becoming an Emmy Award-winning television producer for CNN and other broadcasters, and founding both a media production company and business consulting firm. As a current member of the Baha'i Continental Board of Counselors for the Americas, Ms. Lawson has the opportunity to work on educational initiatives in North, Central, and South America, as well as the Caribbean. Please, out there on your Zoom world, offer a warm round of applause to welcome dear Mwandi Lawson.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's so nice to see you as well, Derek, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I want to bring greetings to everyone who's joining us. Looks like almost 200 people. That's wonderful. What a yeah, lovely interaction. And we're of course at the beginning of the Baha'i New Year, and I'd like to, of course, bring you greetings after this period in which the Baha'is have been fasting and then coming to this celebration of the New Year. And, often when we start a new year, we're thinking about making our plans, we're reflecting on what the previous year was like, and we're thinking about how to have a more productive and just more effective new day. So to me, this is a wonderful opportunity just to be with you. And I want to thank the Wilmette Institute for inviting me to speak to you today, and also for that generous introduction that was given. I would only add to that I first received the message that there was a world religion that was really, really focused on bringing all of the peoples of the world together, overcoming all of these strifes that we have, like the equality of men and women, the extremes of wealth and poverty. I had no idea that this even existed until I happened to be in the African nation of Cameroon in 1999. And some friends brought to my attention this reality. And when I was leaving Cameroon, they were very, very careful to make sure that I knew that I needed to make sure that I found the Baha'is as soon as I returned to the United States. And so my response to hearing this particular message was to go to a devotional in a Baha'i center that very first weekend that I returned to the US. And I share those things because I would encourage us to consider today and really every day, where were we when we received the message, and what has been our response? And what does this have to do with actually making the world a much better place? So I've been reflecting a lot as this new year has begun on what I began learning from that first gathering for prayer that I attended in January of 2000. And I want to invite you to reflect along with me over the next few minutes that we're together here, maybe another hour or so. And we're really thinking about where we were when we received certain messages and what has our response to that actually been. In particular, we've all been very, very drawn to this message of November of last year. And the message, of course, was giving us this wonderful 100-year prospectus on the Baha'i community's development and a vision of where it was going in the future as well. And one of the things that we noticed as we were studying that together is the fact that that time has now come was stated for us. And we have to, of course, each as individuals and in communities and our families, we have to decide, what is my response to that when I receive that message? So I can tell you for sure that I remember so well that when we received this message, I was actually in dawn prayers. But even before that time, the fact that there is dawn prayers every morning in the area where I live has to do with a time not so far back, 2020, you might remember it. In 2020, we were all, of course, undergoing the pandemic. And we were at a certain point in our homes and we couldn't interact with our friends, and our work had been changed. And the society around us here in the United States and elsewhere in the world was going through some very, very profound changes. And at that time, when we perhaps were feeling, what do we do next? We were very grateful to receive from the House of Justice a message at Nowruz. And we weren't used to, as Baha'is of the world, receiving a message like this at that particular time. And one line in that message reminded us that the House of Justice was, in fact, with us, even at this very, very tumultuous and uncertain time. And one of the statements said, and in your quiet moments, when no course of action other than prayer seems possible, then we invite you to add your supplications to our own and ardently pray for the relief of suffering. And so a group of friends in the area where I live, our response to this when we received it at Nowruz in 2020 was to begin praying together every single day at dawn. And that pattern has continued to this very day. And so I can tell you as well that on the morning when the November 28th message came out last year, we were together at dawn prayers. And as we had committed ourselves to at least praying for the relief of suffering each day, we had also begun to learn some things over the course of many years now, 4 years of doing this practice every day, reflecting on it, taking action, and continuing to make progress. And so we now know that we not only gather for prayer, but we also study together. We reflect on our actions that we've taken even since the previous day, and we make some plans for the future. And so when we were together recently at Nowruz, we also recognized that we had received this message that was sent to the Bahá'ís in the cradle of the faith, the Bahá'ís of Iran, who do, of course, receive at Nowruz these regular messages. And in this particular passage, which we were able to turn our attention to, it let us know that beyond shared ideals and aspirations, however, the people of the world are also searching for effective and practical means for the betterment of society. But every political and economic school of thought is overwhelmed by and unequal to the scale, nature, complexity, and interconnectedness of the challenges. Their proponents are themselves confounded and perplexed. And so as we were looking at this together, we were thinking a lot about what are some of the effective and practical means that make the betterment of the world a reality, not just a slogan, not just something that is longed for at some future time, maybe even in the next world. How is it that we're able to make some contributions today? And so, as I mentioned, we were all together on that day when the November 28th message also came out. Often these messages will come out in the very early morning hours. At least we received them in our email boxes at that time. And so we received the message, and I will just tell you what was our response. Well, immediately someone who had seen it said, "We need to study this today." And then immediately, someone who had looked at the fact that it was 27 pages long said, "Well, in that we only have 1 hour, we probably can't study it today. But let's make a plan so that we can actually carry this out and do it with effectiveness so that we can receive this message and then determine what will our response to it be." And so you recall, of course, for yourselves over the last few months, you've been gathering with friends in different configurations, from the family to the neighborhood to your communities and clusters, and maybe even some regional studies of this particular message. But one element that I wanted to draw our attention to is how learning is addressed in this message, because far from being a triumphant look at the last 100 years, the House of Justice is pointing out that many gains have been made in learning about how the oneness of humanity can be established and how we can really make effective and purposeful change in our societies. But we're certainly a far, far distance from completely accomplishing this. And so it points out in one passage, a world largely oblivious to the light of Baha'u'llah's revelation finds itself increasingly divided and disoriented on matters of truth, morality, identity, and purpose, bewildered by the accelerating and corrosive effect of the forces of disintegration. For the Baha'i community, however, the covenant offers a source of clarity and refuge, of freedom and strength. Every believer is free to explore the ocean of Baha'u'llah's revelation, to come to personal conclusions, to humbly share insights with others, and to strive to apply the teachings day by day. Collective endeavor is harmonized and focused through consultation and the guidance of the institutions, transforming bonds between individuals, within families, and among communities, and fostering social progress. So in this simple statement, we can see the certain power that is available through the covenant. And at its central piece, it is, of course, the oneness of humanity and the idea that we must all be striving for this reality, even though, as the previous sentence points out, the world is increasingly divided and disoriented. And so what are we to do in the midst of this current condition, as we are at once one with the world, but also striving for a new reality, one that can exist, of course, in more and more effective ways, in brighter ways, in more and more complex ways as time goes on. but we're not unclear as to what the outcome should be. And we're also given these really, really wonderful measurements of effectiveness so that we can look along the way and we can ask ourselves questions like, is our collective endeavor being harmonized? How is it being focused through consultation and the guidance of the institutions? How are our bonds in families and between individuals and within communities? How are they transforming? And how is this fostering social progress? So we can see as we go into studying and realizing, where am I when I receive this message? And what is my response? What is our response? And part of that has to do with understanding more and more about the significance of questions. You know, within the Baha'i faith, we so thoroughly value questions that we have an entire month dedicated to exploring questions. And we can see that even within this statement, that each of us as Baha'is and those who are coming into connection with the Baha'i faith, we are free to explore this ocean of the revelation. We are, of course, able to come to our own personal conclusions, and we can humbly share our insights with others as we strive to apply these things day by day. So it goes far beyond the conceptual. It goes far beyond coming to a rapid conclusion and then trying to make sure that everyone else has the same conclusion that we do. Instead, we're able to carry these things out by just applying the teachings and trying them out at the local level. You know, the House of Justice, in one of the messages we received back in 2020, it let us know that the locus of activity is actually local. So I can best learn with my family, with my community, within my cluster. And then if we happen to have some insights that are somehow welling up and showing us how this transformation among individuals and within families and communities is fostering social progress, well, in due time, perhaps there will be ways that we can share that generously with others, but that's probably not our first step. And as we were studying this message together, we got this historical perspective, and we were able to look at how it is that we begin to apply these teachings, and we're able to share what we're learning about them. In this particular passage, the House of Justice says, out of love for Baha'u'llah, and reassured by his explicit instructions, individuals, communities, and institutions find in the two authoritative centers of the covenant the necessary guidance for the unfoldment of the faith and the preservation of the integrity of the teachings. In this way, the covenant protects and preserves the process of dialogue and learning about the meaning of the revelation and the implementation of its prescriptions for humankind over the course of the dispensation, avoiding the detrimental effects of endless contention about meaning and practice. As a result, the balanced relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions are safeguarded and develop along their proper path, while all are enabled to attain their full potential and exercise their agency and prerogatives. Thus, the Baha'i community can unitedly advance and increasingly fulfill its vital purpose by investigating reality and generating knowledge, extending the reach of its endeavors, and contributing to the advancement of civilization. After more than a century, the truth of Abdu'l-Baha's affirmation is ever more evident. The axis of the oneness of the world of humanity is the power of the covenant and nothing else. So hopefully, as we've been studying these passages with our friends and our neighbors and trying to apply them to the work that we're engaged in, whether at the level of our community or in our professions, in our efforts to contribute to social action and discourse, we're probably becoming more and more aware that we are free from some of the traps that may occur in our society as people are engaging in trying to one up each other to prove I have the answer to all of the problems that are plaguing us. And if only you would do what I am saying, you would make progress. Instead, we are able to study and be able to humbly apply some of what we come to understand at our local level. And then we can actually begin to measure its effectiveness. How transformative is this? How many more people are actually able to join in this particular endeavor and help our society to advance, beginning at the level perhaps of our own neighborhood, our own community? In that way, people are filled with a greater sense of hope than maybe they usually are when they're trying to tackle some of the major world problems like climate change or sexism or ageism and racism. And they think that just by putting a few ideas out there at the international level or the national level or even the regional level, maybe they're hopeful that this will actually change the society. And often we find that no, it doesn't have those results. And then it just sets the people to wrangling against each other. Let me then tell you my ideas, and I will then try to pit my ideas against your ideas. How much more practical this approach is, and how much more hope it shares with the world around us. And then again, going back to the November 28th message, we had this wonderful look back on how this has been applied over time as the Baha'i community, of course, has grown, and the ability that it has to navigate these principles of the oneness of humanity have also grown. But as we look back, we can see that this process of learning how to learn has been with us since the very beginning. In this passage, it says, as the believers managed their administrative affairs, he, referring to Shoghi Effendi, patiently answered their questions, resolved problems, and fostered the collective life of the Baha'i world community. Gradually, the friends learned to work in harmony, to uphold the decisions of their institutions and support their progress, and to appreciate that both understanding and capacity for action would increase over time. Isn't that true today as well, as we begin to learn in action how to overcome all manner of challenges and stumbling blocks, and to really turn those into stepping stones for progress, because we have this pattern of acting together, reflecting together, trying again, and of course, turning to this source of wisdom, this source of knowledge, which is the divine text, as well as the guidance from the institutions. And as such, we're able to see that our progress is being made. But then where were you when you were first studying this message and you came to this paragraph near the end of the particular message? I remember very well where I was. I was reading it alone shortly after I had gotten off dawn prayers, because I had started it before dawn prayers, but wasn't able to finish. Shortly thereafter, I got to this point, and I literally, it was one of those like drop the mic moments for me. It reads, in the advent of divine justice, Shoghi Effendi explained to the Baha'is of America that given the restricted size of their community and the limited influence it wielded, they must focus at that time on its own growth and development as it learned to apply the teachings. He promised, however, that the time would come when they would be called upon to engage their fellow citizens in a process of working for the healing and betterment of their nation. That time has now come. And it has come not only for the Baha'is of America, but for the Baha'is of the world, as the society building power inherent in the faith is released in ever greater measures. What a moment. Where were we, and what was our response to this? Because we might have had at various times a certain degree of unclarity. That's not in any way not to be expected. Human beings are coming to as much understanding as we can at any given time. So how much should we be contributing to the society building efforts in the United States? Maybe we were thinking, well, our numbers are quite small. Maybe we need to just kind of focus a little bit more on how we develop this community. But then very clearly it states here that the time is now. That time has now come. So with a great deal of excitement, we, of course, are approaching what it is that we should be doing in this particular time. What is our response to reading that time has now come? And how do we draw on the experience that we have had since the beginning of time, but also the more recent experience, things that we've been able to document in our own nation, in our own regions, in our own clusters and communities? How are we drawing on that as we really do come to expect that the world will get better, We're not waiting for some distant future, even though we know that the change that is ultimately called for will take generations to accomplish. So in this particular passage that I wanted to bring to our attention as well, we know that we're in the midst of a 9-year plan in the Baha'i community. The Baha'i faith advances through series of plans that have as their ultimate aim, of course, the unification of all mankind. But in order for that to be more than a bumper sticker slogan, we have to work quite methodically, year by year, 3-month cycle after 3-month cycle, and measure what is the progress? How much closer are people becoming? How are they able to work together as individuals, as communities, and as the institutions of the communities? And so we were able to receive in the December 30th of 2021, this message from the Universal House of Justice that was the initiation of this 9-year plan, one of a series of plans that has this singular mission, which is the release of the society building powers of the faith in ever greater measures. Now, there's so much here. I know you've had a lot of time to be studying this message, and you've, I'm sure, gleaned a lot from it. But I just want to bring to our attention, as we consider what the implications of having this be that time that has now come, the fact that part of this has to do with the intellectual development of community life. How well are we able to actually focus on that as a part of our contribution to the development in the United States of bonds that will eventually overcome all of these social ills that we see in our society? This passage reads, as the contribution being made by the faith to the progress of society in different parts of the world gains greater visibility, the Baha'i community will increasingly be called upon to explicate the principles it advocates and to demonstrate their applicability to the issues facing humanity. The more the intellectual life of a community blossoms and thrives, the greater its capacity to answer this call. It will be up to the followers of Baha'u'llah to provide, in the world of ideas, the intellectual rigor and clarity of thought to match their commitment to spiritual and material progress in the world of deeds. So as with all of these passages and all of the things that we have to consider, this is no easy matter. You know, sometimes I get very, very worried when I'm with a group of people, whether it's within the Baha'i community or throughout the world and the places that I get to work professionally or the places I get to serve. Sometimes when a very complex idea is introduced, the first response I hear is, oh yeah, I get it. I got it. I get it. I get it. And I become very worried at that point because I say, could these people be that advanced? Because I certainly don't get it. What I do see is the opportunity to learn about it. So if we go too swiftly, it's been my experience anyway, I don't know about yours. If we go too swiftly, then the opportunity to really explore some of these ideas and to put them into action is often overlooked because they just, it seems like, well, I read some words and boom, intellectual rigor, got it. But it takes actually a lot of work to get to this point. And luckily, we're not left alone in trying to consider this. We don't have to just have these be the world of ideas because we also do continue to have guidance that helps us to address what does it mean actually to engage intellectual rigor and to increase the clarity of thoughts so that my focus on the oneness of humanity can move beyond just something that I'm stating and actually have some ramifications in the spiritual and material progress in the world as we know it today. So one of the ways that we can look at this is through an exploration of this evolving framework for action. We know of this in some cases because we've been studying it in our own communities. It's a pattern of action that we may take in terms of being able to study together, being able to make some plan that we consult through, and then acting on that plan, and then reflecting on what happens during that, the course of us taking that action. And as we do it again and again, new readings of reality may become more manifest. in one of its messages to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Bahá'ís of Canada, and it's a message that we often study in terms of the development of the Association for Baha'i Studies. Some of you have participated in the ABS conferences and other activities that the organization sponsors. But in this message, the House of Justice writes, central to the effort to advance the work of expansion and consolidation, social action, and involvement in the discourses of society is the notion of an evolving conceptual framework, a matrix that organizes thought and gives shape to activities, and which becomes more elaborate as experience accumulates. So here we're talking about learning. Here we're talking about that process that we often, again, jump to very quickly. I know some of my friends who live here in the Southeast region, we all were attending a meeting last week, and I'm afraid I might have scared some of them a little bit when I was referring to the idea that we shouldn't maybe jump to the idea that we've learned something very quickly. Sometimes a group of friends goes out, has one experience, comes back and triumphantly announces, one of our learnings has been, and then they insert something. Mothers don't want to talk about education of children unless their children are at least 8 years old. Well, that's an observation of one particular activity. Maybe I went out one day and one mother said, I don't want to talk about the education of my 5-year-old. Come back and talk to me when my child is 8. However, I didn't actually learn anything from that experience. I made an observation. And so the observations are important. I need to go out a lot. And like any scientist, I want to make sure that I'm not basing any assumption or any theory on just a very, very small number of observations. I want to make sure that I'm actually having a sample size that is as large as I can possibly make it, given the conditions. It might be that I'm sampling my own neighborhood, or I'm sampling the cluster in which I live, or maybe the region in which I live. And so in each case, obviously, the number of observations that I am making will differ. But nevertheless, before I can triumphantly declare that something has been learned, I need to go through this idea, this conceptual framework, this matrix that helps me to organize my thought. And then the House of Justice helps us to think about this a little bit more when it gives us some very specific ways in which this takes place. This is in that same message. And it says it may be useful to give consideration to insights that have contributed to the community's progress. So again, by the way, it doesn't say it may be helpful to give consideration to things that have impeded the community, to the community's struggles, to the strifes. It recognizes those, but we're looking for insights that contributed to the community's progress. And then it names them. The relationship between study and action, the need for focus, which is not to be confused with uniformity, the challenge of fostering the capacity of individuals and accompanying others in service, the dynamics of our organic development, the institutional arrangements necessary to sustain even more complex patterns of activity, the coherence required among all areas of endeavor, and sound relations among individuals, the community, and the institutions. Perhaps the most important of these is learning in action. The friends participate in an ongoing process of action, reflection, study, and consultation in order to address obstacles and share successes, re-examine and revise strategies and methods, and systematize and improve efforts over time. So in this really, really nicely encapsulated, just a few words there, it's really helping us to understand and organize our thoughts around learning. So this pattern of action that we engage in. But if I really want to have experience with this, it tells me that the most important of these is learning in action. So I can't hypothesize, I can't pontificate, I can't simply study my way into knowing these things. And so we might reflect on the fact that the questions that we engender are at least as important as the things that we perhaps already know. So when I read a paragraph like this, and my friends and I strive to understand it, we try first to break down what are our questions about learning in this instance. And so from the writing in that particular passage, we might develop questions like, what is our experience with the relationship between study and action? What are our expressions of focus? How are we addressing the challenge of fostering the capacity of individuals and accompanying others in service? What is our experience with the dynamics of organic development? What are we learning about the institutional arrangements necessary to sustain even more complex patterns of activity? How are we experiencing the coherence required among all areas of endeavor and sound relations among individuals, the community, and institutions? What is our experience with learning in action through ongoing process of action, reflection, study, and consultation in order to address obstacles and share successes, re-examine and revise strategies and methods, and systematize and improve efforts over time? So these are just a few of the questions. And of course, these are very complex questions. So we wouldn't be able to have a one-day meeting, for instance, and say, okay, we've answered these and we're ready to move on. These are actually the work of neighborhood teams and clusters and regions and nations over a great deal of time as they really reflect on how do we make our society a better place, a place that really cares for all of the people in the society, takes into consideration all of our needs and all of our aspirations. So by looking at these, though, and by having the discipline to create these questions around what it is that we're studying, we then can go out and we can look for examples. We can decide perhaps that we're only going to start with one of these questions. And over the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, we're going to go through the process of the work that we're doing wherever we are. And by the way, this can also be within our professional environments as well. We're going to look at how are we learning these things? What are the observations that we're making? And from those observations, do we see certain patterns? And maybe those patterns become insights that we're able to use. And we're able to see what it is that we can contribute overall to the development of our own society. And this brings us to an example. Maybe it's helpful in the concluding part of this particular presentation to bring to our attention that these are things that we want to work on in our own lifetimes. And so let's take race, for example. Most of us are very, very concerned with ensuring that the racial prejudice that has characterized the United States ever since its very opening days is eradicated. This is a primary principle of the Baha'i faith, one in which we are not confused. We don't have, some of the places that you might go, people are still saying, oh, racism has been eradicated. Why are you mentioning it? We don't have that as a confusion. And in fact, we might ask ourselves, where were we when we received this message from the Universal House of Justice addressed to the Baha'is of the United States in July of 2020? You might recall very well 2020, a very memorable year, wasn't it? And as we know, there was the global pandemic in full effect, and in the United States, based on our own history and the needs of our people, as well as the contribution that we must make to the fortunes of all humanity, we were having a great deal of evidences of the racial strife that exists in our community. But just as we felt that great deal of confidence and love when we received the Nowruz message from the Universal House of Justice, so too were we very relieved when we received this message in July of 2020. In part, it reads, racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life, while blighting the progress of the rest of humankind. It cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and will not designate anyone as other. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all, moral and spiritual. Within the context of the framework governing your activities, it is necessary to carefully examine the forces unfolding around you to determine where your energies might reinforce the most promising initiatives. what you should avoid, and how you might lend a distinctive contribution. It is not possible for you to effect the transformation envisioned by Baha'u'llah merely by adopting the perspectives, practices, concepts, criticism, and language of contemporary society. Your approach instead will be distinguished by maintaining a humble posture of learning, weighing alternatives in light of his teachings, consulting to harmonize differing views and shape collective action, and marching forward with unbreakable unity in serried lines. And so, of course, we've been continuing to interact with this message all the years since we received it, because it's not a simple message. It's not one that we can put away and say, oh, we've done this already. Many of us, including in the Southeast region where I live, it's a part of every single Youth Institute camp. So much so that when we went to march at the King Day Parade, as we do every year here in Atlanta, people were actually using references directly from this message, including the fact that racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. So a distinctive contribution can come from that. What's more, though, based on the example that I gave previously about learning, you perhaps are already developing your own questions. And maybe you've been doing this already with your friends as you've been studying this message. But quite naturally, we not only want to read this as words on a page, we wish to learn how to apply it. And so the way to do that is simply like the one that I was giving before. We might be looking and saying, what is the framework governing our activities? How can we describe that? What are the forces unfolding around us? Where might our energies reinforce the most promising initiatives? What should we avoid? How might we lend a distinctive contribution? So then, of course, we have to get together with our friends. We have to go to the field of action. We have to figure these things out in the opportunities and environments where we have a chance to begin to figure them out. But it's very nice because we know what the questions are that we have before us. And we know a little bit about some of the principles, of course, that are governing our activities. Now, don't be, in any way disturbed by the idea that while we are learning about these things, we will make mistakes. That's just to be expected. Now, we're not going to intentionally go about trying to cause harm. We're going to do the best that we can. But in the course of doing this, we have to, of course, allow ourselves to be able to do things in a way that might actually be errors. However, we do know certain things that govern how we carry out these activities. So for instance, if we know that we want to contribute to communities that are focused on peace and reconciliation, these were some of the things that the House of Justice, of course, pointed out in the Nowruz message to the Bahá'ís of Iran. It described contributions to such communities, communities that have a culture of peace and reconciliation. So I might be able to say, well, I know that there are actually some principles that would govern the path to being one of these communities, to contributing to these communities. And how can I contribute quite directly to this? In any case, we might look, first of all, at the fact that we are aware that truthfulness would be foundational to how we're learning to contribute to these communities. To be sure, truthfulness will have to be learned about as well. It will reach higher and higher degrees of effectiveness. But we are not confused about the fact that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. Without truthfulness, progress and success in all the worlds of God are impossible for any soul. And then, of course, we'd be talking about justice. And we know that in order to begin to reach the level of unity and peace, well, the light of men is justice. Quench it not with the contrary winds of oppression and tyranny. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. And so again, we would accept that although we can't say that we have reached the fullness of justice as a principle, we are working toward it, because it would be impossible for the fullness of unity to be established were it not to have justice as its foundation. From that, of course, we know that we're trying to build this unity of mankind that would only be possible, as this statement says from Baha'u'llah, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. This unity can never be achieved so long as the counsels which the pen of the Most High hath revealed are suffered to pass unheeded. And so again, we would be aware that, okay, we're trying to learn about this principle of unity. We understand that while it is ideal, we can't be triumphant and say we've already established it. And we can know from this passage that we can never achieve it so long as the counsels of the pen of the Most High are passed unheeded. So are most of the people in the world, most of the people in my community, most of the people on my block, are they even aware of these counsels? Because if they are not, then naturally they will pass them unheeded, as many of us did before people were so just with us as to let us know that these counsels existed. So what does that have to do with the fact that, yes, every single cycle, every single day, perhaps, I'm trying to extend the reach of this through these conversations that occur between enkindled souls, people simply, of course, letting each other know that these counsels exist. And then, of course, when I'm trying to contribute to a community based on peace and reconciliation, I get to that level of peace. And I get to this message from the House of Justice in which it says, thus we hold to this ultimate perspective. Baha'u'llah came to set humanity free. His revelation is indeed an invitation to freedom. Freedom from want, freedom from war, freedom to unite, freedom to progress, freedom in peace and joy. So this is just, one woman's kind of a basic model, if you will, for myself as I try to order my thoughts around how can I contribute to a community that is focused on peace and reconciliation. With your own teams of friends, wherever you live, within your own families, within the groups that you work with, you too will be able to develop these type of models, these frameworks, if you will, and recognize that as we apply them, we're able to learn and they evolve over time. Our ability to read reality becomes sharper. We are able to interact and consult with many, many other people about what reality looks like in our community, and we're able to make progress in this regard. But I will say for myself, if I keep all of these things in my head, I don't have much hope for progress. I have to put them down. And for me personally, this is one way of expressing that. There are so many other ways. Some of you will sing these things. Some of you will dance these things. Some of you will write essays and articles. But in all cases, we want to try to carry them out so that we have some room in which to learn about creating these communities of peace and reconciliation. And so I'm thinking again about where was I when I received a given message? Where were we when we received this message? Because there was a message that came to us in April of 2011 to an individual believer here in the United States. And it was so helpful to me, and I'm sure to many of you as well. I remember when I received it, when I first became aware of it, I was actually at the National Baha'i Convention in Wilmette. It was my first time actually attending such a convention. I was a delegate that year. And after the convention concluded, a group of us gathered in the evening to study this message together. And so that was my first time interacting with it. And as I was thinking about how it is that we use a conceptual framework, an evolving conceptual framework, to actually make progress in our society, I was drawn back to this message. And you can recall, of course, from having read it yourself, I'm sure, the House of Justice says, the pattern of spiritual and social life taking shape in clusters that involve study circles, children's classes, junior youth groups, devotional meetings, home visits, teaching efforts, and reflection meetings, as well as holy day observances, 19-day feasts, and other gatherings, provides abundant opportunities for engagement, experience, consultation, and learning that will lead to change in personal and collective understanding and action. So it's been a few years, more than a decade now, since we received this. So we've had a chance to try to carry out some of these things. But isn't it beautiful as we think back on where we might have been in 2011 and how much we could understand in 2011 and how much we could act in 2011? Aren't we thankful that that has advanced and we're able to look at all of these realms of community life that are described here and try to see how does that fit into learning about how the society grows better, how it becomes a more unified society, what unique contributions that Baha'is and people who are focused on applying these principles, what unique contributions can they make in this day? The message went on to really explain to us issues of prejudice of race, class, and color will inevitably arise as the Friends reach out to diverse populations, especially in the closely knit context of neighborhoods. There, every activity can take a form most suited to the culture and interests of the population, so that new believers can be quickened and confirmed in a nurturing and familiar environment until they are able to offer their share to the resolution of the challenges faced by a growing Baha'i community. For this is not a process that some carry out on behalf of others who are passive recipients, the mere extension of a congregation and invitation to paternalism, but one in which an ever-increasing number of souls recognize and take responsibility for the transformation of humanity set in motion by Baha'u'llah. So now, all these years later, we actually have so many communities and neighborhoods that can see at least the glimmerings of this taking place, where that transformation, that consultation is taking place at the level of a neighborhood, and where, yes, we still face issues of prejudice of race, class, and color, even among ourselves. But where we are not asking for someone to rescue us from this, instead, we are turning to our framework for action. We're turning to our consultation. We're turning to our action and our reflection. And most importantly, we're turning to these bonds of divine love. We want to make sure that we grow stronger together, even as we have to confront our challenges. We're not trying to make up artificial communities that don't exist, communities that are already free from any of these challenges. Instead, we're bolstering our capacity to meet them. And we recognize that every single person has a right and a responsibility to contribute to this process. And so, in an environment of love and trust, born of common belief, practice, and mission, individuals of different races will have the intimate connection of heart and mind upon which mutual understanding and change depend. As a result of their training and deepening, a growing number of believers will draw insights from the writings to sensitively and effectively address issues of racial prejudice that arise within their personal lives and families, among community members, and in the social settings and the workplace. As programs of growth advance and the scope and intensity of activities grow, the Friends will be drawn into participation in conversations and, in time, initiatives for social action at the grassroots, where issues pertaining to freedom from prejudice naturally emerge, whether directly or indirectly. And again, the exciting piece of being part of this process of learning is that from that time to now, we actually see some of this taking place, where people are willing to put in the time and the effort and to roll up their sleeves and to make some sacrifice toward actually becoming this community. We have to remember that sacrifice is required if we're going to achieve this goal. One way that Abdul Baha, who of course was the example that Baha'is turn to when they're trying to figure out, how do I do these things? While I am one with the environment, I have to also try to make effort to advance my society. Abdul Baha said, man must become severed from the human world, be delivered from the contingent gloominess. The illumination of mercifulness must shine and radiate in him. The netherworld must become as non-existent and the kingdom become manifest. He must become like unto the iron thrown within the furnace of fire. The qualities of iron, such as blackness, coldness, and solidity, which belong to the earth, disappear and vanish, while the characteristics of fire, such as redness, glowing, and heat, which belong to the kingdom, become apparent and visible. Therefore, iron hath sacrificed its qualities and grades to the fire, acquiring the virtues of that element. And so for many of us, myself included, some of that sacrifice has to be the thoughts that I already have, the opinions that I hold, the things that I have always felt to be true may have to be sacrificed in order for me to engage in this process of learning with a high degree of sincerity and not making so many assumptions about what is actually true. But one nice thing that we should keep in mind along this path is that not only is sacrifice a requirement, so too is joy. I had never before, encountering the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, realized that there is such a thing as radiant acquiescence, not merely enduring, but joyfully doing so. In this particular quote, he reminds us that joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our intellect keener, and our understanding less clouded. We seem better able to cope with the world and to find our sphere of usefulness. But when sadness visits us, we become weak. Our strength leaves us, our comprehension is dim, and our intelligence veiled. The actualities of life seem to elude our grasp. The eyes of our spirits fail to discover the sacred mysteries, and we become even as dead beings. So the delightful piece of all of this that I've been describing is that it is a process that takes place at the level of families and communities and eventually may rise to the level of nations and the whole world. But it's one in which our sacrifices are rewarded by our joy. So I'm going to close by just sharing a small piece of video here with you. It's something that you may have already watched. It's a production of our National Spiritual Assembly, and it describes how a learning process takes place when two friends just unite around our common challenges and really dedicate themselves to applying this evolving framework for action.
Is an educator, a friend,
my favorite people!
Regina is an educator, a friend, a Christian.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to my home. It's so great to see you guys again.
Awareness of the spiritual reality of human beings carries with it the moral requirement that all be given every opportunity to fulfill their potential and to contribute to the advancement of civilization.
Regina and I actually met at a Taekwondo class that both of our children were in.
Her middle son and my oldest son were actually in class together. I think they were about 4 or 5 years old.
And we would sit on the sidelines like parents do and chit-chat with each other.
And we realized that we had more in common than just Taekwondo. She was a teacher. I'm a teacher. She had all boys. I have all boys.
Joy gives us wings, joy, joy gives us wings, joy gives us wings, joy.
Probably about a year or so after we met, I began my first children's class in this neighborhood. So I called her and gave really a kind of brief explanation of what this children's class would be, that some friends were going to be getting together and we were going to be sharing with a group of children some really wonderful qualities and virtues that will really just help them to be better people. And these were based on the teachings of the Baha'i faith that I had mentioned to her. And she said, okay, I'll come and check it out and see what this is all about.
So I would bring my older son. I would drop him off. I would go running, jogging, while he participated in a children's class. And eventually she said to me, you can stay. We have adult classes too. And I said, well, okay, I'll come.
And my soul's gotta have, and my soul's gotta have some place to stay, some place to stay.
I enjoyed the study circle. We went from one book to the next to the next. And the next thing I know, I found myself teaching the children's class, which I really enjoy because, I enjoy kids. I do. And I enjoy sharing the knowledge.
The children's classes give the children the spiritual foundation to understand that we're all a part of this world, and that our purpose is to contribute to make the world a better place.
My oldest son, Isaiah, it started with him. He was involved with it. He enjoyed it. To this day, he still is involved with it, where he actually teaches the youth class for Miss Anita.
Rescue the oppressed, bring hope to the hopeless, shelter destitute.
And my youngest son has Down syndrome, special needs. It's just surprising to see how much he's learned, you know, how much he's picked up on.
I remember one time she came by, and like parents do, was sort of saying, okay, you know, my son is being a little bit of a headache today, and she sort of needed to vent. And instead of just leaving the conversation where it was, which we often do, we hear our friends, you know, experiencing issues and challenges, and we kind of just say, oh yeah, that's terrible, you know, me too. I decided to invite her to pray together. So we shared a few prayers, one of which was, oh God, refresh and gladden my spirit.
And then one day she just handed me this prayer, you know. And it was refreshing, gladden my spirits, purify my heart. It was telling me every day I need to start new, you know. And that's once she handed me that prayer, and I kept it with me. I recited it every morning for about I did it 9 months.
And I just feel like there was something that just shifted at that moment about our friendship from this, I don't know, worldly friendship to kind of like this spiritual friendship, where we were now two souls walking together on this path of service. But it wasn't just a path of service, just serving the community, but it was also serving our families. It was also supporting each other.
And when I had my 50th birthday party, that's the first words. Those are the first words I spoke to everybody there.
Oh God, refresh and gladden my spirit.
Purify my heart.
Purify my heart.
Illumine my powers. And I explained to them, I shared with them how it came about. You know, how Danita shared it with me in a time that I think I was having some challenges in my life. And basically learning that prayer and believing in it, it just calmed me.
I lay all my affairs in thy hands. Thou art
God, my God, and my refuge. I will no longer be sorrowful and grieved.
I will be a happy and joyful being. Oh God.
I will no longer be full of anxiety, nor will I let trouble harass me. I will not dwell on unpleasant things in life. I feel at home. I feel at peace. I have more peace in my life. I do.
So I'm going to pause there and give us an opportunity to have a bit of discussion together. I think there are a few people that have put some questions into the chat, and really appreciate your time and attention this afternoon. Thank you for hearing a few thoughts that I wanted to share about this vision. What do we do, recognizing that time has now come? What will be our response? So I think we're going to take a few minutes to answer questions and just, you know, interact a little bit together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nwandi. That was beautiful. I think the clarity of the ideas and our understanding of the guidance coming from the Universal House of Justice has been enhanced through that talk. And I think that we should have a good deal of follow-up questions, and that the responses that you can offer us will continue to sort of guide us toward the understandings that come out of the guidance. I have several questions of my own, but I think we'll start with some that are in the question and answer section already. And so please feel free to add to those if you have something that you'd like to ask. So one question that comes in here is regarding that the time has now come. should this be applied universally or to communities that have reached a certain level of development? This is the question. And yeah, so I'll just I'll leave it at that and let you respond to that one.
Well, as you know, we don't interpret the guidance. The House of Justice states that time has now come. Now, I think what the questioner, though, maybe is speaking to is what is the response of my community to that time has now come, depending on our level of development, right? And so that's where this evolving framework for action becomes so critical, because I have to be able to read my own reality and what can be done in a place where there is, 6 or 7 vibrant neighborhoods where the expansion of the understanding that was in this video is, reverberating through, 50, 60 families. It's much different than what can take place where maybe me and 2 friends are just beginning to develop the capacity to speak about these things, to make sure that people are aware of them, and to organize maybe our first activities. So we would have to really study well, consult well, and act on the basis of our own reading of reality, recognizing that our reading of reality at the beginning is quite nascent, and it becomes more and more pronounced and profound if we continue to follow something over time. So yes, I think the House of Justice was speaking to the world when it spoke in the message, but I also know that there's wisdom in being able to figure out what does my response look like on the basis of the reality where I live, the teams of people that I'm working with.
Wonderful. Thank you. One question that maybe I would sort of just bring in, since I have a kind of a privileged position here. There are many points of in the guidance of the Universal House of Justice where we're given a kind of vision of the institute process as the primary vehicle by which we can transform and empower populations. And just if you can just say a few words about, like, what are some of the things that we might sort of begin to learn about the use of the institute process in addressing all kinds of social issues, and particularly the eradication of racial prejudice. I think like everyone would be greatly benefiting from that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I have had the benefit of being together over 2 sessions, 1 year apart, where we've come to Atlanta to explore that with teams of people who are not just like thinking in their minds about the fact that if I organize children's classes, if I help junior youth to understand their role in society as one unified people, if all of the adults in the community also can continue to extend their educational process, and if we believe that the gift of prayer is one that's available to all people of all backgrounds, then we begin to make progress, excuse me, in ways that we can't begin to even fathom. But we also know we're building on traditions. So we live in the United States. The United States has made some progress. It has in some ways been able to address. So we specifically were looking at elements of the civil rights and human rights movements that have grown in the United States and have impacted people all over the world. But very specifically, the Training Institute, and we can all go to ruhi.org and read for ourselves the document about the methods and purposes of this institute. And one thing that we know is that it has certain guiding principles. One is universal participation. As the passage that I shared said, this is not something that people do on behalf of other people. Everyone has to grow in capacity. Now, how much capacity each individual has, God determines that. But to have anyone sitting on the sidelines is not to leverage our full potential and to realize that we actually aren't going to be able to establish these systems of justice that we say we long for. So the Institute, of course, is one level of justice. It allows people to have access to these tools, these teachings, and their application. Again, not an intellectual exercise, not a book club, a way of saying, okay, the children in our community are not receiving a standard education, a basic sound education. Many of them are not reading well. Okay, well, in addition to the fact that we must address the spiritual advancement of the people, we're also learning through the tools of the Institute and the social action that often naturally emerges, very simple acts, right? Like making sure that all of the children can read well. So that often extends beyond just the maybe the weekly children's class that we have. When we observe and we're speaking with families and families are expressing, these are our aspirations, these are our concerns, then we're taking steps to actually meet these things. And the Institute, of course, the Ruhi Training Institute has decades of experience all over the world with how populations are empowered. So it is, you know, people sometimes say to me, is it only the Institute? And of course not. However, as you read in the December 30th message, we read about the Training Institute and educational endeavors. So all people must have access to education. And the most practical means that we have at the community level to ensure universal participation is, in fact, the Training Institute. It's been quite well proven over time in a variety of contexts.
Thank you. Let me just read a couple of the questions here from the question and answer box here. So thank you for this thought-provoking presentation. I noticed that the sample questions you presented are oriented toward analyzing progress in terms of evolving capacities, as opposed to evaluating progress in terms of changes in concentrations of power. I was wondering, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned about reframing change in this way in a professional setting? And relatedly, I also wonder if you have any suggestions about effective approaches to learning to recognize capacity in populations that are often assumed to have no capacity.
Yeah, I love those questions, especially since, you know, they're very complex. So we're actually not looking at just redistributing power, we're actually reconceptualizing power. So many of the assumptions that we make today about who has power, who has capacity, we're making those on the basis perhaps of flawed understanding of even the relationships between people and what does power look like. So it wouldn't do any good just to state, you know, actually in the grand scheme of things, all people, of course, are equal, inherently created so, and have the right to release their capacity, as that passage from the July 2020 message pointed out. You know, racism blights everyone because it's an actual weight on people being able to release their full capacity. But racism also has certain assumptions about power, which we might explore together and discover are not true. But in all of our professions, in the ways that we interact with each other and in society, we actually behave as if they were true. And that, of course, perpetuates them. So when groups of people are able to come together, and, you know, I would just say, as far as a population, recognizing capacity in a population, what I enjoy is when the population recognizes its own capacity, realizes that I am nobly and wonderfully created. I am a mind rich in gems of inestimable value. Therefore, even though I live in a society which has oppressive structures and has ways of interacting with me that assume that I have less capacity and, in fact, less power, I don't believe that. And so part of the reason that movements have extended themselves to human and civil rights, even in these oppressive conditions, are because people actually were able to reconceptualize power. Now, we know that we haven't reached the full efflorescence of that, so we really must strive. And I would just add, we have to become more systematic. We are quite, you know, we move from thing to thing. We have certain fads and fancies that emerge. In the message of 2011, I think the House of Justice describes it as a pattern of fits and starts that we have had in the United States when it comes to addressing race. We have to set the course. There have to be some groups of people that say, over time, and regardless of whether anyone notices, gives me awards, applauds my actions, or even speaks negatively about it, I am going to continue on this course. I want to learn about how people live in unity, how the oppressed become those who are the leaders of their own society, of their own communities. And that really is their, you know, it's empowering that population itself to recognize those things. And my experience has been that the Institute has been a marvelous tool for awakening those, at least those nascent opportunities for us to experience this.
Thank you. Maybe there are some more general questions here that we, might lead us into some various paths of understanding. One question is if you could expand on tips for walking in daily life, like the videos that were shared of the women in their sons' classes, and with the awareness to speak Baha'u'llah's words in these normal daily activities. Like, are there any, people are wondering, like, what are some daily practices that we might sort of think through?
Well, I think just having that awareness that this is not an activity, this is a lifestyle. So, one is the prayer. You rise each day and you say, I wish to be in a situation where I can learn more and more with those around me about how this unfolds. That's what those two women did. And I think in the video, I love that because it's so simple. Every day, I take my kid to this class or that class. I am at my workplace, eating in the lunchroom, but if I turn my attention and I assume that all of these are spaces for learning about how the world gets better. So then when the opportunity, like the woman very clearly points out in that example, if a woman says to you, I'm having trouble with my child, you can very easily say, me too. Sorry about that. Teenagers, they are a real pain. Or you can also say, this is an opportunity for us to release our spiritual powers, for us to draw closer together as two mothers walking a path of service, not only to our families, but to our community. And she sees that opportunity. So I think, in calling ourselves to account each day and reflecting, we can just look at how many times during my walk today was I able to do that. The nice thing too is that over time, if you work with teams, you will be able to do that as a cohort, not as an individual. So we have examples like you all read the United States, the National Spiritual Assembly, in one of its recent feast messages, wrote about a community in Los Angeles, the View Heights community. In the View Heights community, for instance, they have learned that if I look outside, I notice that people are walking. Normally they are walking alone. What would happen if we tried to spiritualize this process by, one, just encouraging people to be together, but then also elevating conversations and so forth. And so they established, okay, we walk 3 times a week together with all the people in the community. And now the person that used to be jogging by themselves is saying, why are people, okay, let me jog over there and see what's happening. And because it's not just jogging, it's people who are aware that we're transforming the very systems of power around us every single day. They're able to, make progress in that regard. So I think, the idea, just knowing it's a daily walk, it's a way of life. It's not an activity, if you will.
Thank you. And one of the things that you brought up in your talk was the way in which this pattern of daily life necessarily kind of entailed a sort of like a humility in relation to questions that are difficult to answer, and that we shouldn't be sort of overly triumphalist in our sort of in our imagining that we understand how to address certain kinds of challenges. And you also pointed out that one of the things that we're called to is sort of radiant acquiescence, right? And so that we come to challenges with a certain kind of attitude. And of course, as individuals, we all face our particular challenges. And so there's one question I thought, an individual in the audience is asking about a particular challenge, and maybe some principles can be brought to bear on the question that she asks, or that this person asks. I'm a new Baha'i and recently shared my faith with my Christian family. My sister has chosen to not talk to me. I'm sorry if this is not topical to the presentation, but beyond prayer, how can I help my sister to not fear the Baha'i faith? Thank you so much for the presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing such a beautiful testimony. I also am the first Baha'i in my family. So I know that, people are being introduced to something that they've never heard of before, and they have a variety of different responses to it. So I think one, I'm gonna, you know, I will send you a private message as well. But I was just thinking that one thing to remember is that these ties of divine love. I think someone asked in the question about what is the role of love. And the role of love is seminal. We have so many passages that refer all activity begins with a simple strand of love. Barring that, I can't go anywhere. So I always encourage, whether or not people are talking about faith, or there's often divisions in families around politics, all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, we love our families, and we should always keep that in mind. And we're striving by day and by night to make sure that we can have these bonds of unity with our families. But in that message from July of 2020, the House of Justice lets us know that ultimately the power to transform the world is affected by love. Love originating from the relationship with the divine, love ablaze among members of a community, love extended without restriction to every human being. This divine love, ignited by the word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities in human hearts, open minds to moral persuasion, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems so that they can gradually take on a new form in keeping with the requirements of humanity's age of maturity. And then it lets us know that we're the channels of that love. So I would just say to anyone, anytime, especially with a beloved family member, like a dear sister, I have one sweet sister as well, and would not want in any way for her and she and I to be disconnected. It would be very, very painful. So I do pray that this will come to be something that you all can reunite around. But the idea that I am in no way trying to oppress my family with my faith. And if they can understand, I am only a channel for divine love. And it mentions that these intimate conversations. So a lot of times we are trying to resolve something, not in the case of this individual and a family member, but sometimes we're trying to resolve things in the public sphere. We talk about call out culture. I always tell friends, I belong to the call in culture. Frequently, you can look around for me at a public gathering and you might see me in the corner talking to one individual. Because although I recognize that there are many things that have happened in the environment that are perhaps racist, sexist, other things, I need to talk one-on-one. I need not call this individual out. Human beings respond very poorly to humiliation. We respond very well to love. And so I think that's, just one gift that we have is the idea that, in the Baha'i faith, we do not proselytize. And so there'd be no chance that I would be coming into my family and attempting to make them become Baha'is. But I want them to remember, I love them. I really, really do. Just as these flows that we want to share with all mankind, we definitely share them with our own family members.
Thank you. Let me just try and bring together maybe two questions. One is regarding sort of like a principle that we hold in high esteem, which is justice, of course, right? And this idea that the hidden word of Baha'u'llah, which asks us to think about justice, and so that we might see through our own eyes and hear through our own ears. And is there any sort of insights that you might have, for how do we sort of think about the principle of justice? And then also maybe combining with that, like if we are to be just in our sharing of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, then we need to engage with those who are both, with high degrees of education and with relatively little degrees of formal education, right? And so what are some ideas that we can sort of think about when we're bringing the revelation to those who justly deserve it at every sort of level of, let's say, intellectual or academic accomplishment?
Yeah, that's, again, why I think the Institute is just. If we know the origins of the Institute, it comes from a place where people who were formerly enslaved and then became indentured to sugarcane plantations and remained at the lowest levels of their society. However, in trying to apply the word of God to both their spiritual and material advancement, the tools that the whole world now gets to use come from that. So this is in no way a place where people of high academic achievement get together to discuss, although there certainly are forums for that. We don't, as Baha'is, we don't disparage education. However, the Institute is for all mankind. And I'm thinking specifically of a wonderful opportunity I had in South Carolina some years ago. I was standing in the front yard of a woman whose child was part of the Institute camps that we have had for some time in the Southeast region. And she was expressing to me how happy she is about how her son is advancing and what it is meaning for her family. And then she said, I wish I could be in some of those classes, but I had to drop out of high school. And so I began to explain to her that actually the courses and the process of community building are available to all mankind. And I in my own, shorthand, I said, it's like a $5 university. I said, the materials generally cost about $5. And if you don't have $5, there's always a means made for you to be able to study. However, this is available to you and your family in this community. And you, in fact, you're the mother of 5 children. Therefore, you are the first educator of many people already, and you can become a teacher. And she said, I can become a children's class teacher? I didn't even finish high school. Of course you can, because this education process is just. It is intended to reach all people. Not all of us have had access to high degrees of education. And so it was very interesting because as we were going through, she also then picked up this nomenclature, which is highly inaccurate, but of the $5 university. And she asked me, well, can my cousin also come to the $5 university? Yes, of course. She asked me if I had a brochure for the $5 university. I said, I have better than that. This is the Institute coordinator for your cluster. She will help you to organize your family. That's justice. You don't need to have to, to go here and there and be cut off because of whatever circumstances you have in your society. Everyone must have access to this. And so I think the Institute is one of the strongest mechanisms we currently have for ensuring educational equity in all of our communities.
Wonderful. Just maybe a couple more questions again to sort of combine 2 here. There's one question about a community which is experiencing some positive things through the Meaningful Conversations initiative. And then there's another which is asking about like a sort of, I think, the enacting of this principle of universal protagonism, where they have junior youth and children's classes and adult classes happening in their home. But how can we sort of transition from that condition where we are the host to empowering others to be sort of the protagonists of some of these efforts, And so I think in like where we see sort of significant or we see some successes, but those successes are resting on the efforts of a few people, like how do we sort of, kind of allow for others also to sort of partake of the joys of protagonism and hosting and so forth?
Yeah. Well, we will experience reality. Reality is already that Baha'u'llah has drawn the circle of unity and all mankind are already inside. All mankind are already protagonists, but we are yet unaware. So our question might be, seeing as this is already your inheritance, maybe I will just let you have it because holding your inheritance is not just. So I will just say that from my own experience as a person who encountered the Baha'i community, I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, I met Baha'is in Cameroon. The Baha'is, they were so wonderful. They didn't in any way, for instance, tell me so much about the faith. They spoke with me and they asked me questions. And when I would answer, they would often laugh and say, are you sure you're not a Baha'i? When I got ready to leave, they said, well, you better make sure that you meet the Baha'is when you get home. And I knew where the Baha'is were because I'd been passing a Baha'i center for many years. And as a journalist, I planned at some point maybe to stop in and look at the Baha'is. I'm a curious person. What do the Baha'is do? How do they pray? What do they wear? Do they have any dogmas or different things that I should know about? With my friend's encouragement, I went to the first devotional. And here's the thing. The people in that devotional gathering knew about protagonists and the fact that the people already exist as protagonists. And so I sat down, not as a seeker, but as someone who was just going to look at Baha'is. I'm going to watch you all. What do you do? However, I couldn't get comfortable before a man ran up to me with a pile of papers. He said, do you want to do a reading? I said, I'm from California, not the South originally, so I wish my mannerisms were a little bit more genteel like they are in the South. I looked at him and said, I don't even go here. What does that mean in a devotional? He then asked a capacity question. He said, can you read? As it would be, I can. He handed me a reading. I am a protagonist. Now, I'll not tell you that, there's a lot more to this, but I will tell you that by the fourth time that I attended that devotional gathering, that same gentleman with his pile of papers, by this time I understood the Baha'i faith didn't have a clergy, it's not congregational, and all of us have a right to contribute. A woman can walk in off the street and she's doing some action. By the fourth gathering, he said, I won't be here next week. Can you pull the writings, is the way that he stated it. All that I knew at that point is that to have a gathering for prayer, I needed a pile of papers. And since a friend had given me, on the very first day that I attended a devotional, had given me a copy of the Hidden Words and a prayer book, I was able to make a pile of papers that had the words of God on them. And I was now the host of the devotional by the fourth time that I attended. So I don't know that it's so complex. I think sometimes, though, if we will do this simple shift of consciousness, when the counselors received the message in 2021, the December 30th message, in the very first session, when a member of the Universal House of Justice addressed us, we were told that this 9-year plan is not so much a plan of developing new skills and capacities. We've been building a lot of those. It has to do with shifts in consciousness to a large extent. So when I organize a devotional, does it mean that I fix really good food and I give everybody something to read or to study, and then they all go home? Or are there subtle ways in which I can help them to recognize this is already your birthright? I am not giving you anything. You're already a protagonist. However, your awareness and your capacity to carry these things out may be more or less developed just based on our experience. So I don't know that it's quite as complex as we sometimes make it out to be. I thank God that that gentleman handed me that reading, and despite my somewhat rude reply, asked me a capacity building question. Had I said I cannot read, he might have had to give me another task to do, because everyone deserves to have something. But as it turned out, I could read. And so I was basically, at that point, I never had the opportunity to watch the Bahá'ís do anything. I was always among the people who were working.
And we too thank God that he asked you that capacity building question. It's been a wonderful session. It's so great to be with you. I'll just, leave it open to you if there's anything that you'd like to share just before we close out. Thank you so much, Nwandi, for joining us.
Well, thank you all so very much, everyone who's been able to join today. I hope that this was in some way useful. Again, it's really just a gathering together of the guidance of the Universal House of Justice and other central figures of the faith, and trying our best to learn about this evolving framework for action. Because if we can begin to harness learning in the United States, we have a great contribution to make to the elimination of all of these prejudices and other forms of oppression that really are keeping America from reaching our full potential. So I hope we will unite in more and more and get more and more experience in how to apply learning over time. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. Always appreciative of being on with you as well.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. And we hope to see you soon on other programs from the Wilmette Institute.